In this video, we're going over 10 hero combos that you will dominate with in ranked. In addition to that, I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks on how to best play the combo successfully. But I recently had a whole bunch of students reach Masters and Grandmasters after getting private coaching. So if you want to climb really fast and reach your true potential like so many others, check out my Patreon links right now in the links down below. Now, the first combo that we actually got to talk about is Hammond and Sombra. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this combo goes so well together. First off, they have really perfect timing with one another. Hammond gets to go in and slam, and Sombra can always be ready to follow that up. So the Hammond doesn't have to wait around and try to perfectly coordinate it with a different dive DPS. Sombra can be ready and waiting, and if you're communicating with each other, you can have that perfect engagement. And a slam into a hack into both of y'all focus firing just about any target, and they're just gonna die right a freaking way. That being said, there's another layer to this that I think is super important to understand, that both Sombra and Hammond both require disciplined reaction, right? Like if Hammond goes in, he requires cooldowns, he requires peel, so does Sombra, and it kind of overloads the enemy's cooldowns, it overloads the enemy's attention, and if they're ever caught lacking or not super quick to react to any certain thing that happens, all of a sudden they're just going to be losing people left and right. And I do think that this is a really strong duo, but not as strong as the obvious one, the elephant in the room, Fara Mercy. I had to include it on this list because it's so important that you play this duo right, and I think a lot of people are just playing it completely wrong. They're locking it, but they're not doing the right thing. There's a couple of things that you have to make sure that you do. Number one, Mercies. You have to follow your Fara. I don't care where they're going. They could go on a really wide flank. They could be going just around the entire map. Doesn't matter where they're going. You're going with them. You're not leaving them to go help your team. If they're going for an aggressive play, they really need you to go with them. But a lot of Mercies are like scared. They will only play with their Fara when they're in a really quote unquote safe position on their side of the map. But Fara and Mercy together can really play anywhere they want to. They can play behind the enemy team, they can play around rooftops, they can go everywhere. Mercy, you gotta understand that you need to go with your Fara, and then also alternating that damage boost and that heal over and over again, making sure that you're trying to uptime damage as much as possible. Don't be healing the Fara as like a preliminary thing where you're like scared the Fara is gonna take damage, so you're pre-healing them. Be reactive and wait for the damage to actually be dealt, because you don't want to actually miss out on an opportunity to get a kill because you're not damage boosting that Fara. Now, for you Fara players, you can't be afraid of self-damage. And this is such a big deal because a lot of Faras will not shoot the ground as they rocket jump. They won't shoot rooftops to keep themselves afloat, which you can do by just damaging yourself with your primary fire. And that, if you're playing with the duo, if you're playing with the Mercy, all of that can just be healed over. You don't have to be afraid of dealing yourself damage, and there's a lot of legitimate reasons to do so, and that's a super big deal about Fara. And then in addition to that, when you're rocking this duo, all of a sudden, I want you to really be playing, one, the skybox, and two, don't be afraid to wrap around the map. Don't be afraid to play on the enemy team side of the map or completely away, isolated from your team. The idea is that you're drawing a ton of pressure while constantly getting value, and eventually you're going to look for opportunities to pivot in more aggressively. And in order to do that, you can't play in a very linear way where the enemy team can control the areas that you're in, and they don't have to respect you outside of the same direction as your team. Now let's move on to the next duo, which is actually Hanzo Sigma. Especially after the Widowmaker nerf, Hanzo is now the best poke DPS to pair with Sigma. And these characters are kind of just bread and butter, right? You're going to play them on every single long distance map. You should 100% be playing Sigma and Hanzo. Now you can still have Widows and Ashes and all these other DPS that you can play with a Sigma, but almost always there should be a Sigma and Hanzo on these long distance maps. And the thing that you also need to understand about these characters is that Sigma can play a really wide angle to like the left, applying pressure, while Hanzo plays a wide angle on the right. You don't necessarily need to be playing the Hanzo behind the Sigma. It's more like cross pressure, where if the enemy team want to get a good angle on the Hanzo, they have to push into the space that the Sigma controls, and Hanzo is trying to funnel information to the Sigma at the same time while helping apply pressure to his off angles and his flanks and things like that, getting like a Tracer out of there or whatever the case may be. And then of course Sigma ult works really well with Hanzo ult, but also just Hanzo in general being able to body shot and get these characters killed that are getting slammed down. And overall, this is a really powerful duo that I think is a great one to be able to whip out with a duo partner on a number of different long distance poke maps. Now, next up, we do got to talk about Lucio and Zarya. Now, of course, Lucio is going to combo really well with pretty much any dive tank, but with Zarya in particular for ranked, it's super strong for a couple of reasons. Number one, Zarya wants to be able to pivot faster, either pivot away or pivot in. Pivot away when you're low on cooldowns, you want to keep that charge, you don't want to get staggered out, and pivot in when you want to get more value out of your bubble for trying to engage aggressively. And being able to do that is hard without a Lucio that you're communicating with and working together with. So it's super important that y'all are both on the same page with each other's cooldowns. The Zarya should know when Lucio has amp up speed, and Lucio should be actively aware of how many bubbles Zarya has, how much resources Zarya has, so he can kind of evaluate the advantage, and he can evaluate when Zarya would likely want to go in. And then in addition to that, you got to understand that if the enemy tank is trying to overwhelm Zarya, Lucio can manage that and control that tank by booping them away. And if the enemy tank is trying to overextend a bit too long, trying to back up, Lucio can mess with that by wall riding and booping them back in, and Zarya can finish that person off. So together, these characters are super synergistic. And another aspect of this that's super important is if your Zarya is high charge with a lot of bubbles and you have speed, you can pivot into a play out of nowhere that has nothing to do with what the rest of your team is doing. Like a Junker Queen could be pushing your back line, and out of nowhere, you could just speed bubble your Zarya into their back line, kill their Ana, kill their cast out of nowhere. They can't do anything about it. They have like a freaking full HP, double bubbled Zarya just speeding into them. They're just gonna get melted. And then you can kind of slow down the fight and sustain from there, wait for your Zarya to get bubbles back, and then, you know, re-engage. But in the meantime, you're just on speed, you're backing away from anything that wants to kind of take you head on, and then boom, pivot back into an aggressive play whenever you get that speed boost, whenever you get those bubbles. Super strong, definitely requires coordination, so it's really gonna need a duo, but amazingly powerful if you can pull it off, and one of the best ways to climb in ranked. Now, the next duo that we got to talk about in this video is Baptiste and Rein. And I think that this one's a really powerful one. Of course, Baptiste is good with a lot of brawl tanks and even poke tanks as well. But the thing about Baptiste and Rein that I think works so well together is specifically, one, Rein can play a mega aggressive brawl against characters that sometimes it's not that favorable for him to brawl. You know, characters like Ramatra, characters like Junker Queen. Sometimes it's a bit close, and Baptiste can kind of heal you up to a really dramatic amount, and all the while building up his ultimates, which combos very well with double Rein Fire Strike, and being able to coordinate that I think is also super strong. These characters together just are like the ultimate brawl package. This is also kind of beneficial that I don't think it requires a ton of communication outside of the ultimate combo to pull off. It's just more about Rein having a support that he can really rely on when he's trying to pivot to an aggressive play or an aggressive play plus a shatter play. This duo really enables each other very well in that regard. Now, next up, we do got to talk about D.Va and Zen. Now, the concept of peeling is incredibly important, and all that means is just going back and helping your team out if they're under pressure. And this is something that D.Va does better than pretty much any character in the entire game. And specifically, there is one character that is constantly under pressure, constantly being dove, constantly being targeted, because if they're allowed to live, you basically win the game. And he also is very fragile, aka Zenyatta. So having a character that can protect Zen is super important. And D.Va is that character that's so strong. Being able to play on an aggressive angle, denying certain angles to the enemy team, and then being able to pivot back to your Zenyatta, DMing, Tracer engages, Sombra engages, and just keeping him protected overall, super powerful. In addition to that, D.Va wants to kind of overlook the battlefield, playing on a high ground, looking for opportunity, and Discord can make that a reality where if a target is discorded, any squishy, D.Va can just melt them. Even tanks are potentially just destroyed by a D.Va engaging rapidly onto them, because that's another aspect of D.Va that is kind of lacking, right? She doesn't have a ton of raw damage, but combined with that Discord, that burst damage and that focus fire can be amazing. So both these characters kind of work directly together to not only be aggressive, but to protect each other, or at least D.Va protects Zen, and any target that is full engaging onto a Zen, if they're staying in the fight, getting discorded, kicked, and then freaking slammed by a D.Va, super, super strong. I think this is a very, very powerful duo that is going to win you a lot of games when you learn to master it. Now, the next duo that we got to talk about in this video is Lifeweaver and Cassidy. And right now, the verdict's still out about what specifically you want to be playing with Lifeweaver. But it's obvious that Cassidy is one of those characters for a couple of reasons. Number one, Cassidy, his biggest problem is that he's easy to target if he's out of position. But you want to be in these aggressive positions a lot of the time because you can potentially, you know, get a couple dinks, pop off. And you kind of have the best of both worlds where you get to go aggressively, pivot in, get dove, pulled right back to your Lifeweaver. In addition to that, Lifeweaver can allow Cassidy to take the high ground. So there's some maps like Nubani First Attack that if you could just go to the right side and just put a Cassidy on the high ground, super, super strong, and can allow Cassidy to be played on a ton of high ground centric maps, getting himself in a really, really great position to be effective at dealing damage, going for plays, and then also getting bailed out by Lifeweaver if things go awry. In addition to that, the fact that you can just rise up a Cassidy on your pedal at any moment, super, super strong, especially with high noon. It can be a fantastic combo, or you could even go on the pedal yourself and pull Cassidy up and over when he high noons, and he can get a really, really sick vantage point. I think together, these characters work extremely well, especially for ranked, to make a ton of plays, hard carry some games, and it's very, very underrated. Now, next up, we do have to talk about Ramattra Mei. And this is the cornerstone for all the top Brawl Ramattra compositions right now that are seeing play in the World Cup. And they just work so well together. If you wall anything off, even if they manage to get away, like let's say a Rhine, he's going to be so low that he's just barely backing off, and Ramattra can just burst the rest of the damage through his shield, slow him down, prevent his escape, and being able to cycle the cooldowns of Mei Wall, plus Ramattra's slow and Ramattra's Nemesis form, it kind of works very, very well together. In addition to that, Ramattra has a certain weak point. After you pop Nemesis, you are vulnerable. You can no longer brawl it out, and Mei can protect that. Not only punishing enemies from coming in close, but also walling any tanks off and defending Ramattra during that time. And the cycle between pivoting aggressive and pivoting to a more passive playstyle based on Ramattra's cooldowns, really, really strong. Not to mention, one of the characters that is really annoying for Ramattra to deal with is Tracer, and Mei can represent a one-shot with Icicle. So when you combine all these factors together, they just perfectly play into each other, protect each other, and I think it's the cornerstone for one of the most powerful compositions you could possibly play in ranked, with a ton of potential to get some free wins all in all. So definitely master this duo. Now, the next character on the list, number 2, is Winston and Tracer. And I do think that for ranked, this is the dive pair that you want to play. If you're all the only people playing dive, this is phenomenal. For a couple of reasons. Number one, Tracer can set up in an aggressive angle, but not in the fight, just buying time, poking, applying pressure to the enemy tank, scouting for his team, and looking for an opportunity. And when that opportunity arises, the Winston pivots in, and the most important thing is that bubble just allows Tracer to go nuts. A bubble in the middle of the battlefield, all of a sudden, Tracer can weave in and around that bubble to completely destroy Hanzo's, Ana's, Cassidy's out of nowhere, because being able to use that little bit of protection to keep you alive against, you know, just random cast grenades, getting headshot, getting slept, it's amazing. And you can pivot to such an aggressive playstyle where you basically you're poking, you're waiting for that opportunity, the monkey jumps in, bubbles, you pivot in very, very aggressively, get as much value as possible, recall, and then you're waiting in for the second engage on Winston as you get your recall back, and that's kind of the optimal engagement pattern between these characters. Now, it is really important that the Tracer knows how to get in position, but stay safe and not full commit. You're not going to get any resources on this off angle, so you can't realistically go for anything. You can't play too close to where you would could potentially get forced out. The idea is that you're drawing some amount of attention, but you're not in a position where enemies could ever kill you or ever threaten you, and you're waiting for that opportunity, and you're just ready to follow up on whatever the Winston's doing, because the Winston bubble and engagement is going to bait a million cooldowns out, and then you're just kind of left to free roam and clean up. Super strong together. Definitely one of the most powerful ranked duos you could possibly play, but also fairly difficult to master. Now, last but certainly not least, the duo that I think is probably the freest wins in ranked is Ana and Brig. This is a double support duo that I just think is just so freaking strong, mainly because an Ana that is allowed to live and has a very hard time dying is gonna carry a game. So much nanos, so many powerful nades. The Ana can be aggressive with her nade, look for opportunities to carry, and the Brig is primarily focused on bodyguarding the Ana. And together, these characters just form such a stabilizing unit that just kind of gets to deal with whatever comes across. Like, you can really destroy enemies, any dive, being able to rally, nano, nade, sleep, with flail, with inspire. I mean, you're just gonna destroy any dive, and even outside of dives, you're just like this omnipresent duo that feels impossible to break through. Unless someone is one-shotting you, you're just not dying ever with this duo, and it's so freaking strong together. It's just really important that you make sure to be on the same page with each other, make sure that you're always playing within each other's line of sight or even closer than that, and then just generally looking out for each other. And in a pinch, you can even do stuff like nanoing your Brig ult, and, you know, if someone is all in diving you or whatever the case may be, I think it's actually a really good idea, if the enemy is still playing dive into you, to sandbag your Brig ult and use it as a defensive Brig ult to deny dives. Super strong, especially when paired with Ana. But all in all, these are the top 10 duo hero combos that I would suggest to play if you want to climb. But if you want private coaching to reach your true potential, check me out on Patreon right now in the description down below. But thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.